All right, to build off of what we talked about last week with reception theory and looking at audience response, today I want to dive a little bit deeper into looking at cultural work in different types of responses among different types of audiences. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what are some different approaches that we can take to looking at audiences broadly and their reception of media versus specifically looking at fandom and fan communities. And what are the tools that we have available to us for looking at those much smaller subsets of an audience of any specific TV show. Before we do that, we want to talk a little bit about what are we talking about when we say audience versus what are we talking about when we say fans or fandom. So an audience in the context that we're talking about here is every person who watches or reads or receives the media text. So in our case, all of the people who watched the TV show. This is not necessarily everyone who possibly could. It's everyone who already has and did. If you're looking at it from a marketing perspective, it might be broader than that. But for what we're going to look at, it's everyone who has seen the show. That is a little bit different from the imagined audience, which you read about a couple of weeks ago, which is the creator's mental conceptualization of the specific group to whom they imagine they're communicating through their text. Sometimes that's called something like a target audience, so not necessarily everyone it possibly could reach, but the specific person or group of people that the creator is imagining as they are writing. That's going to be the imagined audience. So a fandom, on the other hand, is a much more specific part of the overall audience. So a fan is an individual who identifies with and passionately engages with a popular media. A fandom, on the other hand, is a community of fans. It's a very participatory community who collectively engage with one specific media text. So some of the larger well-known fandoms are surrounding Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, Doctor Who, that sort of thing. And the thing to remember about fandom is it's specifically not just a group of fans, but a group of fans who engage together, whether that is online or in person, in specific activities surrounding the specific media they are engaging with. So across all of these different subsets of audience, we can think about cultural work in different ways and kind of go about investigating what is going on in different ways. How is this specific media helping this group either reinforce their current ways of thinking and feeling and acting, or allowing them to imagine and rehearse new ways of thinking, feeling, and acting in the world? It looks a little bit different from each of those perspectives. So if we look at our broader audience response, and we're looking at cultural work in there, Hall's reception theory is going to be the most helpful for us. We'll be looking at, among that full audience of everyone who has watched the show and also responded to it publicly in some way. We're going to have dominant readers who have accepted the intended message of the piece. Often that means that they thoroughly enjoyed it. We might have oppositional readers who reject the message. Usually they also dislike it. We'll have the negotiated readers who might accept parts of it and object to other parts. So why would we take a look at that broader sense of the audience and the cultural work that's happening there through reception theory? Some of the reasons might be that it gives us a broader sense of the overall impact of that specific media text. Is there an overarching sense of what people are responding to? Are they agreeing with this or not? Overall, how many people did this reach in the first place? What has been the overall response and how many people are responding to it? Some things can reach a lot of people, but then hardly anyone takes the time to respond. That's going to be a pretty good indicator that while it may have reached a lot of people, the impact might not be all that significant. Can't say for sure, but that is a solid indicator. Looking more broadly at audiences might give us an easier way of investigating cultural trends on a larger scale, looking at public discourse and attitudes. What are people talking about when they are displaying a sort of dominant reading? What are they connecting with? Or if those oppositional readers, what are they pushing back against? What are they opposed to here? What are they resisting within this text? And how is that connected to ideology? Did this piece of media challenge them in some way? Whether that is to change a specific belief that they hold, or they might be rejecting something that no longer serves them culturally and they're ready to move on from. So those are the sorts of things that are a bit easier to see looking at audiences as a whole. On the other hand, if we're looking at fandom, we're looking at a much smaller subset of the overall audience. And when we're looking at that, reception theory becomes a little bit complicated. Overall, most of the time within fandom, you're going to have a dominant reading of the text, meaning that the fans agree with the overall meaning of the specific show here. They're engaged in it. They are really passionate about it and want to spend a lot of time talking about it and connecting with other people over it. So to look at these specific communities, it's useful to us to look at fan studies, which is the academic field developed around the 1990s and has been developing further since then, looking specifically at fans, fan communities, fan cultures, and fan activities. And it draws from the humanities, the social sciences, psychology, media studies, audience studies, cultural studies. And some of the major goals is to really look at in depth at that sense of cultural work of what is this show doing for the people who are highly engaged in it. So if you're looking at fandom, some of the reasons that you might do that are it allows you to get really specific about the community that you are looking at. You're also going to be looking at the people who are most engaged with and invested in the media being examined. So compared to an overall analysis of the audience that we might get from reception theory, this is going to be much more narrow in terms of how many people we're looking at, but also this is likely the community where the most cultural work is happening, as far as this specific show goes. This is generally the community where it's having the most impact because this is the community that is most engaged with this specific show. So when we are looking at fans specifically and fandom, reception theory doesn't always map onto them so cleanly, and doesn't necessarily give us the answers to all of the questions that might come out of it, especially since as fans are engaging with the show, they do a lot of that through various other activities that might range from simply discussion to creating their own artistic output inspired by the show. And there, it's not necessarily dealing directly with just the explicit message of the show anymore. And often it kind of becomes bigger than just the TV show itself. So Fan Studies asks us to think about a little bit more actively seeing fans as sort of using the show and engaging with it for a specific purpose. So it asks, what purpose does this media serve for fan communities? Here is getting a little bit more specific in looking at the individuals involved in a specific show and thinking through what role does this character, if we're looking at a fictional piece, or celebrity play, or what function do they serve in their fans' eyes? So it's not necessarily what that character or celebrity is doing, it's more what purpose do they serve for the fans? What does that kind of public persona or character kind of allow them to think about, to talk about? What role do they play in that person's imagination? So when we're thinking from that perspective, a really useful term here is parasocial relationships. And what those are is basically these one-sided relationships that a fan will engage in with a character and or a celebrity's public persona. It's that emotional investment and attachment that fans of books, movies, TV shows, sports teams feel often very strongly despite the other party not knowing them personally. And for the vast majority of us, that celebrity is never going to know who we are. And in part, this seems a little odd to frame it this way, but a lot of the time, good storytelling, good character development, the purpose is really to help us develop these parasocial relationships, to get us as the audience invested in that character, to keep following them through years and years of a TV series and to care what happens to them. For celebrities, if they're going to maintain their public profile, getting millions, thousands of fans really invested in that public persona and in their lives is how they kind of maintain their fame. So when we are looking at this with real people and celebrities, what kind of these parasocial relationships end up looking like and how we engage with them is through things like tabloid magazines, and kind of those celebrity gossip articles online. We don't know these people, but we are still interested in their lives. With fictional characters, this can play out with often how we feel a character should be represented, or how we react when their stories go in ways that we don't expect them to. A couple of examples of parasocial relationships really kind of playing out and impacting audience response. We can see that a lot in casting controversies a couple of years ago with the Star Wars movies. The casting was much more racially diverse than it had been in the past, and the Star Wars fandom was, parts of it were up in arms about that, and how it had changed what they had originally thought of as what can a stormtrooper look like, what can a Jedi look like. A similar thing happened with Mindy Kaling's Velma, playing off of the original Scooby-Doo character from the 70s cartoon, and reimagining her as a South Asian woman. I think that speaks to Mindy Kaling's parasocial relationship of her own with that character and wanting to see herself in there and have that character reflecting her own experience more closely. But then we also end up with backlash of other fans saying that that's not how Velma is supposed to look. Even though she's a cartoon character, she was depicted as white originally. Also, we can see parasocial relationships having really positive impacts, getting people to really deeply engage with characters. We've got things like fan theories, fan fiction, and making it this very kind of imaginative space. When these parasocial relationships cross over into the real world, things get a little bit more sticky. I think we can see that in like celebrity support, particularly on social media. An example here where I'm thinking about how parasocial relationships and cultural work and some of what we talked about it with critical discourse analysis are really intertwining in interesting ways. And I think bringing out a lot of different cultural questions in the recent Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial over the last couple of months that has played out. And we can kind of see this case, which is really just between these two people and what has happened with them as a couple at home, kind of really being brought out into the public light and just millions of people feeling compelled to share an opinion about it. And that's intersecting with discourses about domestic violence and abuse, and gender and mental illness. And you can't really get away from how fame also plays into that, how Johnny Depp is this very well-known, beloved actor with a decades-long career in very popular movie series. And you can see how that very much influences the way that people read him in this trial. And they're kind of negotiating their relationships depending on their viewpoint from what they've heard from all of that news, whether they want to hold on to this very idealized image of him in their minds, or whether new information about him as a person separate from the characters that they've seen him play in movies is kind of conflicting now, and they're having to negotiate that. So, in short, looking at parasocial relationships in connection with cultural work, we can really get back to this question of, is this specific person or character, what do they seem to represent to audiences generally, and specifically to fans? Are they being held up as a hero, as an example of a specific way that one might live their life, as a warning or a cautionary tale? I think that can happen quite a lot too. As you are looking at audiences, which part of the audience do you want to look at? And how is that going to influence the kind of cultural work you are looking for as you are completing your investigation?